I've got a really special guest here. His name is Benson, and he's actually started 7 companies, and the first of which was Able Aerospace, and he grew this from 3 to 500 employees. And as I'm seeing here, he had 15 consecutive years of 20% compounded average annual growth before his exit of an undisclosed 9 figures, which is really neat. I can't wait to just hear your journey of entrepreneurship. And now he's got ETW, which is Execute to Win. And that is more of, from what I was learning, more of a consultant based company where you're actually helping to implement all of the things that you've learned through your decades of entrepreneurship. And I'm just excited as well to speak about your books. It looks like you have gotten 2 times on the Wall Street Journal bestselling author and your books. So, your most important number one, and Value Creation Kids, which helps parents teach their kids about money and values.
Jamie, it's good to be here with you. And we're both in Arizona experiencing the rare rainy day in Phoenix and Sedona.
Right? I know. We got to appreciate this because it doesn't happen often.
I love it. Yeah.
Well, I really like to kick off this by asking you, because we're on aligned with purpose right now. And sometimes, especially as entrepreneurs, I feel for a lot of people, when you ask them why they started that journey, it's a lot of times for freedom, right? And so I'd be
Hmm.
curious for you, though, what does that mean for you to be aligned with your purpose?
Yeah, my purpose, and this is what drives ever increasing internal fulfillment, is about really getting more and more of the world to embrace holistic value creation, whether it's in organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, government, communities, families as well. My first book, titled Your Most Important Number, is about helping organizations increase the value of their companies much faster because of applying this methodology. The second book, Value Creation Kid, that you mentioned, The Healthy Struggles Your Children Need to Succeed, it's really about operationalizing value creation within families. And I was really careful with my co-author to make sure we got the language right to where everybody would get it, especially middle and low income families that are so busy. Where would they ever have time to read a book? And the way I think about value creation, it's 3 buckets. One, it's material value creation, which is what most people think of, money, et cetera. But emotional energy value creation, positive emotional energy, and then the third bucket, spiritual, which is community, connectedness, love. It could be deeply religious. It's a little bit different for everyone. But I think creating value in balance in those 3 things, and to me, the scarcest commodity in the world for humans is positive emotional energy, because when that's running on 9 or 10, it supercharges everything else that we do. And so that's my journey. It's in all the work that I do with organizations, with families, with nonprofits, and it's a powerful purpose, and we can talk more about it. And I love it. I mean, it really gives me strength and guidance in life.
Wow. I love how it's in 3 buckets. It seems really well rounded, and I love the spiritual component, but also it being more actionable and tangible to like the
Hmm.
results around you as well. That's really interesting. Yeah, I'd be curious. I'd be curious for you. How have you worked to facilitate that in your own journey and make sure that those buckets are in alignment with you and what you're creating?
Yeah. Well, as I went along, I mentioned before we started recording this session, in the 1980s, where I made most of my money was playing music. So over 1,000 nights playing concerts and doing all kinds of stuff, original music, cover music. But that was my business out there, moving along. And then I started my first company in 93. And as you said, I've had 7 that I've started from scratch. I'm starting another one actually here, at the end of this quarter. And so as I go through that, it's like people, we're making money and everybody's talking about that, but it never felt complete enough. And I'm not one of those that virtue signals and say, oh, it can't be about the money. Money's important. It's an important thing to cultivate. It just is. But the emotional energy and the spiritual side, which is, impact building community around the world and all that, those things are wildly important, and we need more material value cultivation to be able to have bigger impacts over there. So it's there's not good or bad anywhere. These are just things to have in balance. And so to kind of answer your question, can I think about it in a more balanced, holistic way that's a much more complete answer that makes sense. And I've yet to find anybody where this doesn't resonate with them in a big way. Folks running or have run, $20 billion plus organizations down to startup entrepreneurs, everything in between, community leaders, et cetera. It's a cool way to think about it. I'm not sure, how does it land on you? You've probably the first time you've heard me talk this way about it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it's so true. I mean, and that's why I feel, especially in the online space, sometimes people have resistance to money, to making money, to hiring coaches, to being charging for their services, really. But at the end of the day, you're right. I mean, it all goes back to the more that you can get that material creation, right? The bigger the impact that you can have. And it's very true.
Yeah, absolutely. And my team and I work with a lot of nonprofits, and it's not uncommon when we first go in for a number of the team members to say, well, I can't be thinking about raising money, and I'm not here for that. I'm here to have this impact in the world, whether it's helping people, saving animals, the planet, whatever it is. It's like, okay, guess what? Last year or the last few years, we've had this level of impact, and it took this amount of resources to be able to have that impact. Please help us cultivate our ability to raise more material value, create more material value so we can have an even bigger impact. And then they start to really get it. This is why it's important. It's just a thing. It's just a tool. And it's really helping, especially in the nonprofit space where people will say that. And I find, Jamie, I don't know about with you, but probably 80-90% of the time when people say it's not about the money, they're virtue signaling, because when you really look at what's going on, it kind of is about the money. And I think a lot of people will say things that sound virtuous to get people to do business with them or even manipulate in a way. And I look at the world and I say, look, there's this really large group of folks that are intentionally creating objectively measurable value in the world. And then there's another group that's gotten a little too big, I'd say, in the last few years, that is intentionally trying to rig the game, which by definition is skimming off of what we create as value creators. And I want to increase the size of this bubble of folks that are creating value and push back at the same time to reduce the size of the folks that are, kind of rigging the game out there. And just let's get on the value creation bus, if that makes sense.
Yes. Oh, I love that. So the value creation bus, what does that look like?
Well, the people are more
What's on the
intentional about
bus?
it. Yeah, I would say that people are a lot more intentional around value creation. And if you make it only about the money, you're going to feel pretty hollow because it's not complete enough. You can be really good. You can do a ton of stuff over there, and we've all heard stories. People with some of the richest people on the planet are just not happy. They're not fulfilled. Well, because they didn't create value in balance with the other two buckets, emotional energy and spiritual. And the reason for me personally, that I say positive emotional energy is the scarcest commodity on the planet. When I'm running on 9 or 10 on a scale from 1 to 10, I feel like, gosh, my arm could fall off, and I'd like, whatever, I've got another one. When I'm running on 1 or less, I get a flat tire and it ruins my week. So I'd rather live only half as long on 9 or 10 than twice as long on 1 or 2, because life would be so much more fulfilling, the other way, in a shorter amount of time. So, getting people to kind of think this way, understand it, and have a more balanced approach to it. What I find is it drives intrinsic motivation and grows that within people, as opposed to, so many running around doing what they think they're supposed to do, and always looking for that extrinsic motivation, which I've never found to be very fulfilling, and I haven't seen it work in anybody else.
Mm. Yeah, I'm interested because you mentioned a number scale of 1 to 10. How
Yeah.
do you determine where you are on that number scale within those three buckets?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, as you look at each of them, what are you doing to intentionally cultivate creating value in each one, right?
Mm,
So if I take material value creation, okay, well, that's easy to measure. Here's how much money I'm accumulating by hopefully exchanging my best efforts for the accumulated best efforts of others. We call that money currency. And then on the emotional energy side, we all know people that when we're in the room with them, we could be having a great day, and then all of a sudden we need to take a nap because they just drained all of our energy being around them. And others
mm,
where I feel like I need to take a nap, but I happen to run into somebody, and now I'm ready to, run a marathon because they've energized me. So, which person do you want to be, and what are you doing to intentionally cultivate your emotional energy to have your days be higher and higher on average over time? And we all cycle. I don't have perfect days every day. Nobody really does. But over time, your lows are higher and your highs are higher. So you can intentionally cultivate there.
yeah.
And then on the spiritual side, this third bucket, I think of it as connectedness and the people that I'm interacting with in the world. It's community. It's how am I pulling people together to create these opportunities for value creation. So I look at it and say I want to develop everybody all the time. Doesn't matter who I run into. I want to elevate emotional energy. I want to be that person, not the opposite. And I'm not looking for an immediate return on anything, but what I do of that with the communities, it will expose me to things I can choose to get involved with to cultivate even more material value if I want or
Mm,
not. But by doing this selfishly, I'm stronger because of the community. It feels amazing. Selfishly, it feels quite amazing, and I want to feel good. And I have so many opportunities because of this work, and it just doesn't happen overnight. You have to be intentional about it. That I say no at least once a day to really cool opportunities because of how I position myself, and I love it. How does that resonate with you? Does that make sense?
definitely. Yeah, it does. And I'd be curious on your journey of building up these businesses and, I mean, to have seven and now be starting the eighth. Uh,
Hmm.
I'd be curious, at what point did you feel like, but maybe before you realized these buckets existed? I mean, was there a time where things felt super out of alignment for you on this journey at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. When people ask me, "Hey, where'd you get your start in business?" The truthful answer is at 6, 7 years old with a neighbor that wasn't a friend or family member that asked me unsolicited, "Would you pull weeds in my garden for 25 cents an hour?" I'm like, "Sure," because
Wow.
I'm older guy, and back then, in the late 60s, you could get two candy bars and have change for a quarter. It was amazing. And I thought, well, this is really good. It's a lot of work. And she had rhubarb in the garden, and I loved raw rhubarb. I would eat that, and she was fine with it. And then I started shoveling snow, and I could get 50 cents a driveway. And so, I could do two of those an hour. So now I just fourfold how much money I made. Wow, I'm rich. And then I got a paper out, then four paper outs, and then
Wow.
a busboy, dishwasher, cook, and now I'm playing in bands. And I got on what I describe in the book Value Creation Kid in one of the last chapters, this value creation cycle. And I tell this story in the book. So I saw a capability that I wanted to have. I struggled to become capable. It elevated my confidence, if you will, and I didn't stop there. I used that to create value. And then I just kept taking bigger and bigger steps as I went through that. And and now all the businesses, all the different hobbies, and all the cool things that I've done for me is just taking bigger steps on this value creation journey. And I've learned, which is super powerful for me, to trust the struggle when it's really hard.
Mm.
And I'm moving towards something worthy. Most people act like victims, like everything should just be easy. No, the struggle is how you get in shape. And the harder it is, I internally there's this little warmth going on saying, "Wow, this is going to be really cool," when I come out the other side because it always is, like literally always is. So that's how I think about it. 6 years old, I got my start pulling weeds for 25 cents an hour. Do we all know a neighbor kid that would be willing to do that today for, obviously adjusted for inflation? amounts of
Right.
money to give them their start and go forward and learn how to create real value in the world that's intrinsically motivated, not doing what everybody you think they want you to do, but discover what you're meant to do going through. And one last point on this is in the book Value Creation Kid, we talk about the purpose of an education should be to create value in the world, not get a good grade, get a diploma, get a degree, get a job. In that environment, kids are really doing what they think they're supposed to do most of the time. Let's teach them right out of the gate, even before they get to kindergarten. The purpose of an education is to create value in the world. Let's create an environment where they discover what their value creation superpowers are and what would be different in the world if we had a couple of cohorts go all the way through K-12 that came out into self-reliant, value-creating adults that can think critically, they're financially competent, or even like me, if they chose or choose to. I was financially independent. I was kicked out of my house at the beginning of my senior year. I spent one night in my truck, no big deal, had an apartment the next night, and just kept moving forward. And one of the best things that ever happened to me. People talk about their hard stories like they're victims. Like, wait a minute, this struggle made you who you are. Why would you change anything? I love who you are. Yeah, yeah,
Wow. Wow. You have an incredible story. Uh, I'd be curious. So we've talked a lot about value and creating value for the world and also connecting that to what you're meant to do. But I'd be curious, how have you known along the way what value to create? Like, does that come down to solving the biggest problems that you see that are in alignment with what you're meant to do? Or I'm curious how you've navigated that.
yeah. I think for each of us, what's the process you go through to discover, what your purpose is? And as you go through that and you find what it is, then that kind of describes the value that you want to create in the world. And Evan Carmichael, a friend of mine, I read one of his books recently. It was called Built to Serve, and he has a simple process in there: who, why, and how. And I thought, gosh, that's really brilliant. So who, like, what's your primary number one core value, and then the why piece of it is like what was your greatest pain? What was your biggest struggle in life? How did you save yourself? And then this kind of forms into your why and what you're doing in the world, and then how you save yourself. How do you build on that to and have a real purpose and how you approach life to help others go through that? Because everybody's gone through struggle. Very few intentionally leverage that after they come out the other side of saving themselves to help others down the same journey. I just thought that was absolutely brilliant, the way he described that in his book.
I've just added that to my book list and I can't wait to check it out. I've actually not heard of that one yet and it was not on there, so thank you.
You
That's
got it.
it's really that's really interesting and it actually really reminds me now of like the consulting space and the coaching space, which I saw that you have a mastermind, so I feel this ties in really beautifully to that because a lot of time that's why I feel that industry is starting to take off and take over really because it's so many that are turning those struggles to into their how, into their reason for being and into their way that they're actually guiding others who are on a similar path to what they were as well. So I do see I feel more and more people are beginning to embrace that, but I'd love to hear how you're doing that in your community as in this new role, right? In this business that you're
Yeah.
creating.
Yeah. So as a kid, if I think about the why, what would be my most important value? And to me, it's virtue, and I've thought a lot about it. And it's the way I think about practicing virtue. I'm doing things that objectively, measurably create value in the world, and at the same time, in proportion, doing things to push back on anything that takes value out of the world, from the smallest to its scale. So I'm doing both. To me, that's what it means to practice virtue. And then there's other layers in there that I cultivate, and I think about this weekly. I mean, I even meditate on it. And so where did that all come from? And the biggest pain for me, kind of going through my emotional struggles as a kid and all that, was watching my family, my parents, extended family, friends, the people that they all hung out with. It was a kind of a toxic and fairly dangerous environment. Won't go into a lot of detail. But I was just thinking, gosh, this is how people treat each other when they're doing everything they can to rig the game in their favor. I never want to be that. And I realized as an early teenager that, my parents really, they weren't in a position to raise themselves, let alone 5 kids. This has nothing to do with me. And it must be horrible to live in that headspace. Just terrible. So I was no victim in any way, shape, or form. These were really interesting observations and healthy struggles for me, and maybe you could say unhealthy in a lot of ways, but I leveraged it to start my journey here of pushing value creation out into the world. And I couldn't articulate it nearly as well back then as I can today. But I look at all the work that I'm doing, and I've over all the different companies and all the years, I've hired probably collectively thousands of employees over time, and now I'm impacting well over 100,000 employees in the different companies that I'm working sort of directly with here, and then indirectly with the book and everything else, it's millions. And so I'm pushing that out to get it out that way. I have mastermind groups that I meet with where CEOs come in. It's a completely different format. I use my mind methodology that I talk about in Your Most Important Number to guide these groups. But the CEOs come in, and their main job, and they agree to this. I mean, this is what they're aligned to, and they come in is to continually increase the value of their organization responsibly. That's your job. And by proxy, your senior team is to do that as well. So I've got all these CEOs. I limit it to 8. Every 2 months, we do a deep dive in everybody's business, and it's about holistic value creation in each other's business. Mm-hmm. And last year, I think my slowest growing member in my groups that I run was just under 40% growth. In terms of the value of the organization, and the highest one was, what was it? 1,100% growth in value. And this is all we're thinking about and holding each other accountable. It's not showing up, tell us what's on your mind. I mean, there's a real process we go through. So I'm doing that. And then my dream here, and I'm going to start the first one this year for sure, is to get to a place where half of my CEOs in these groups, these members, have their own junior execute mastermind group where any kid coming out of high school that already has some traction with a business like hanging Christmas lights or moving furniture, they're going to be running a junior execute CEO mastermind and help them go to the next level. What I love about the kids coming out of high school with traction is they can do math, they know how to hustle, they totally get it. And I predict that 95% plus of these kids, once they join a group, will have a very viable, nice, ongoing, growing business. Whereas most of the startups today, they've got an idea and they want to be seen a certain way, and they take a bunch of cash, and 95+% of those lose everybody's money that comes in. And so this is another way to get value creation out into the world, and again, holistic value creation. And then with the book, Value Creation Kid, we're already in just under 3,000 households with this gravy stack methodology. And my co-author and I, Scott, want to get into in the next 5+ years. We'd like to be in 3 or 4 million households. And so we're really going for it to try to operationalize value creation in households or families with what we call the gravy stack method. And again, something people can actually apply. And I've got a number of really cool stories from middle and low income families about how it's working. It's like, yay. I mean, that's what I care about. I don't care so much about the elitists that talk about what the world should do, that they're completely disconnected from. I care about what really works with the majority of families on the planet.
Wow, that's really interesting. And now in that book, since that's kind of, I think all the things you're doing right now is incredible. But I want to talk about that last piece right there. You mentioned so much change in those families. What do you see them, if there's a single even takeaway from the book, like what do you see as the number one thing they're implementing to experience these shifts and transformations?
I think for the children, it's having a framework. Having an intentionally created environment from which they discover their value creation superpowers, and they're able to do it. And I find that most parents are doing a lot of pieces of this, but they're not packaging it together. And I think there's this assumption that motivational nudges will change the world. Like if every kid just read this book, and I've heard this from a number of authors, everything would change. I'm like, nope, it won't. Maybe for a really small percentage, but for the masses, nope, it won't. Motivational nudges don't work. They don't work for adults. Adults aren't great at connecting dots most of the time, and kids less so. So, but we can create an environment where we go through. So, story that I've shared, and I've got a number of them, but this was like one of the coolest ones because there's a very short 3-part story here. Dad, middle income family, texts me after the book comes out, and it came out in April last year, in May, and says, and I've got my tentacles out, I want feedback. And he says, here's something my daughter just said to me. And she said in the text, he wrote out, Daddy, thank you for saving the dirty dishes for me to help me with my value creation work. I'm like, oh, that's super cool. He's beside himself and how cool it is. And then he calls me in June and he says, into June, he goes, let me tell you how value creation summer is going, in his thick Boston accent. I'm like, what do you mean value creation summer? Because I don't use that term in the book. And he goes, well, it used to be that my daughters, one's 11, one's 9, used to fight over who had to do the work. Now they're fighting over who gets to do the work. And the younger one's getting up earlier intentionally than the older one, walking the dog, doing a bunch of stuff. And the older one's arguing, wait a minute, we're a team here. You have to give me a chance too. So, okay, well,
Wow.
that's pretty cool. And all we did was change the language, how we talk about it, how we set up expectations and all that, your house rules, your job for the family. And then the last part of the story, the older one goes to middle school for the first time, and part of the process is each student meets with a counselor. So on day 1, she meets with a counselor, and then day 2, a counselor calls the dad and says, tell me everything you can about value creation summer, because I'm going to use this with all of my students that I meet with and all of their
Wow.
parents. All right, so back to, it doesn't matter how cool our idea is, will the language resonate in a way that it can be applied to create real measurable value in the world? And I'm like, yay. This is a confirmation. There's a lot of stories like that, and it's not watch this video, read this book. It's, hey, what are the rules of engagement that we create, that this environment within the family from which kids can create value? And so how do we talk about value?
Wow.
Well, value creation is the 3 buckets that we've been talking about here. And then second, house rules. Well, what are the expectations? What's your job for the family? As you get older, what are the expenses you pick up? How do you earn extra money? We call them the 3 E's. So you can make money, learn how to manage, pick up more and more of your expenses. We even have some parents that are having the kids pay for cavities. It's like, if you're not going to be responsible and brush your teeth and you get a cavity, that one's on you. I mean, it's so cool how they're thinking about it. And then the third category is, financial competency. We don't care that you can talk about financial literacy elements. What we care about is that you can apply this stuff in the real world. And so financial competency is a big piece. And then the last part that most parents get wrong, and with the best of intentions, is healthy struggle. So why do we want to take all struggle away from our kids? If that's really how people got stronger in life in all areas, the less I go to the gym, the stronger I'm going to be and the more flexible I'm going to be. It makes no sense. And so being comfortable with that and being intentional about those 4 parts of the gravy stack method, it's making a difference in a really big, fast way. It's amazing. And so why do I do this? Selfishly, I want an amazing world to interact with as I age out. And even though I love, and I say this often, and it's true, I love dystopian future movies. I'm a sci-fi buff and everything else, but I don't want to live in Mad Max, down the road. And if we don't fix the kids, I think we're going to end up in something that's not nearly as good as it is today. I want it to be better.
Wow. That's interesting. And the concept you're speaking of in this book, oh my gosh, if only I could have got my hands on that when I was 9 years old. Oh my goodness. I
Yeah.
just can't even imagine the shifts. That's incredible. And yeah, it's interesting. We were actually talking about that yesterday, my fiance and I, about all the movies of the future mostly have the same ending. Well, similar, right? And usually it's one that I don't know about you, but I don't want to see either. And so I'm just loving how you're looking at this from the ground up and how we can begin to make these shifts now with the generation that's going to be that change. And so you've mentioned struggles a few times here, and I would love to talk a little
Yeah.
bit more about that. How can someone begin to leverage the struggle that they're in now today.
Yeah, every struggle, whether it's a healthy struggle, which most struggles are healthy struggles. All struggle is not trauma. If a kid has a bad day at school, let's put them on drugs and send them to five counselors. Most struggle that people talk about is a healthy, normal struggle, and we should embrace that. There's also unhealthy struggles, kids that are really being legitimately abused in so many ways, or you look at, I think about Viktor Frankl and his book Man's Search for Meaning and the struggle he went through surviving, the concentration camps. You can take any struggle and leverage it to create more value in the world. So I didn't have any of this when I grew up, and I wouldn't change anything. I feel like if I play the, oh, I wish I had this game, then I would get here after having, oh, now I know more. I wish I had that. And I would just keep looping back and forth. I'd be, going back to the future all the time. I feel like our struggles make us who we are, and we can choose to apply them to create value in the world, or make it our identity and be a victim. And kids, I get it. They're kids. They're discovering a lot of stuff. We're adults. We're supposed to help them through these stages. But you know what? A lot of adults that I meet, when things don't go perfectly, they act like a victim. It's not their fault. And yet, wait a minute, you're here because of decisions you made. So what did you learn as you're going through this struggle to create even more value in the future?
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I love just helping them through this struggle and to learn the lesson that was inside of that versus just trying to fix something or yeah,
Yeah.
take the struggle away. That's what I feel a lot of my childhood was. My mom would do most of it for me
Hmm.
versus showing me or even guiding me to do it. That was one of her things. She didn't want me to have to do any of the dishes or clean anything. She wanted me to have that childhood. But then what's really interesting from that, I'm curious your take on this, in her doing all of that for me, it actually, I was able to see my mom always cleaning things, keeping things nice, cooking meals, doing all that. So she actually never had to ask me to clean my room because I would always just do it.
Hmm.
And then growing up, I always kept my place how I wanted to, right? Like very clean, very minimalist for the most part.
Yeah.
And I believe it actually, she taught me so much by just doing that. Like I learned from watching her, which was really interesting. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on that because yeah, I think I took something away from it that she didn't expect me to.
Yeah, well,
It's
I think
interesting.
I think it's quite common to learn from others that are leading by example. They don't even have to talk
Yeah.
about it in an intentional way. And I learned what not to do by watching other things happen as I was growing up. And
Yeah.
so you can learn both ways. And I agree with you. It would have been really cool if I had super supportive, caring parents, a loving environment. Like people talk about this, perfect world. Well, I mean, every family's dysfunctional. It's just kind of normal to be dysfunctional, I think, in
Yeah.
some way. And have these mentors and everything else. But then I wouldn't think the way I am today. So I don't. Would that have made me stronger and better today, or would I be something less, less driven, less all of it. I don't know. I don't really want to go back and find out. I just want to keep, moving forward. I don't think about anything that's happened in my life in a glory day sort of view. My I'm having a great time now, and I think I'll have even better times as I move forward. I just want to keep working on this value creation journey. I have a lot to
Yeah, it's
cultivate. I'm not
amazing.
even anywhere close to what I believe is possible. And I think what's possible for all of us is completely unknowable.
Wow. So then I'd be curious for you because you're saying you're just getting started. This is just the beginning for you. Like, what does this next level look for you? Like, what's next for you? What version of Lee are you being called to step into?
Yeah. Well, it's the same version, just doing more of it, advancing this concept of value creation holistically out into the world. And there's so many things that I can do. This last year has been a bit of a setback for me. I was diagnosed with systemic lupus and another autoimmune disease, which was super nasty. and I'm coming out the other side. I've got hyperbaric oxygen therapy or a chamber in my house, and red light and intermittent fasting, and I mean all these different things I'm doing. Didn't take any drugs. I've suppressed everything probably 90% in terms of
Wow.
pain and symptoms. But gosh, for 4 months, it started early March last year. For about 4 months, I couldn't even get out of bed or walk. It was so bad. Lost 30 pounds in 2 months. So that set me back a little bit. But here's the interesting thing. So in the middle of it, I'm finishing the book and doing all kinds of stuff. And my hands are swollen. I love to play guitar, and I couldn't even close my hands to make a fist. It was something else.
No.
But because my purpose is creating value in the world, even the thought of not being able to play guitar, and I think I showed you some of my 50 guitars hanging around here. It's like, whatever. I have a lot of friends that love guitar. I can write more books. I can speak more. Playing music to me is just a way of conveying and cultivating emotional energy, value creation. And I've always thought about it that way since I started as a little kid. It was like, what did it feel like? What was I trying to, get across? So it helped me through that. And even my co-author, he didn't say, "Oh, you poor thing." He goes, "How are you going to leverage this to create more value in the world?" It's like, that's the perfect question. And
Wow.
it kind of goes everywhere when people say, "Oh, you must be so proud you went to a prestigious college," or "You must be so proud you're an author." It's like, what does that mean? That's how you're seen. Isn't the better question, how did the book actually create value, or what are you discovering around that? Or if you went to that, what did you learn, and how are you going to apply it to create value in the world? But people are so caught up in how you're seen.
Mm.
It's and part of this value creation journey for me is to shift people's perspective. How is this making a measurable value creation difference in the world in balance in all three buckets?
Wow. And so it sounds like that is at the core of every belief you have, but also every action you take comes down to that question of how is this creating value in the
Yeah.
world?
Yeah, my purpose, big part of my identity, all of it is that. It's not that I'm a guitar player or, I had a martial arts school for quite a number of years, taught Taekwondo, or my music, performing career, other hobbies, other things. If value creation is it, if something goes sideways, it doesn't blow me up. If a kid, let's say they're a star football player in high school, or on the swim team, and then they get injured and they can't do it. If that was their primary identity, that's pretty darn devastating. But if their primary identity is creating value in the world, you just shift. I'm going to go do it over here now with what I have to work with.
Mm. Oh, yeah, that's huge. Wow. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I just your mindset and the outlook that you have. I mean, it makes sense. This is everything that you teach and you're a full embodiment of that. And that's just really neat to have heard from you.
Well, thank you, and I'm a work in progress. I have a long ways to go, and really actually doing this stuff every day is. I mean, you have to do the work, can't just talk about it. And, most experts out there haven't done the thing they're talking about for a long time. I think we
Mm.
all have to do it.
Wow. And I'd be curious, what does that look like for you then on a daily basis? Like, do you have a specific, I mean, we know the question asking if that's, but I'd be curious if there's anything else that you start your day with or that you end your day with just to really connect to that value that you're adding.
Well, first and foremost, have to do the work. So every single day, I'm working with organizations to increase the value of their organization. I'm a leadership performance coach for sure,
Yeah.
but equally, I'm a brain in the room to help them create more value and do really intense. I jokingly call it full contact consulting work, where we're really going for it and having a blast, and it's just so much fun.
Mm.
So I have to do that every day, and then I have to take care of myself. I need to be physically strong, mentally strong, and what I think about, what when I meditate, what am I, sort of cultivating as I go through it. I think about truth. What does that really mean? What about mind intent? Why am I, doing all of this? Exploring virtue more deeply. benevolence. I want everybody to win because we all win faster and bigger when that happens. And then forbearance, be patient with people. I feel like we live in a world where almost everybody's the only adult that's ever been in any room. And if you want to know what's wrong with people and things and why stuff won't work, they'll give you exactly what the truth is there, instead of helping everybody, create more value. And so those are the things that I think about and I do. And remain, I've heard this said a number of different ways, but remain a happy warrior. This has been going on for thousands of years, never going to go away. Let's keep expanding the number of folks on the planet creating value and doing what we can to shrink those that are trying to rig the game. And this is just life. Let's go for it and let's have fun with the work.
Mm. I feel like that was a beautiful like bow on this whole conversation. That was like one of those mic drop moments. You just totally nailed that. Uh, where can the listeners pick up your books, and where can we find you just to learn more about you and your journey?
Yeah, thank you. If you go to my website, it's etw.com. It's an acronym for Execute to Win. You can find all the podcasts that I'm on. You can find my books. You can find the work we're doing with CEO groups, with actual companies. Our clients range from startups to $20 billion plus market cap. I think the largest one today I'm working with is about $60 billion market cap company. And you learn a lot more about the work. So the podcast I'm on, plus I'm launching my own podcast titled Show Your Value. That'll be there in about 3 weeks. Thank you.
Congrats.
And looking forward to that. And it's all about just pushing this value creation message out in the world. So yeah, please go to etw.com to learn more.
Oh, how exciting on your podcast. I can't wait to check it out and listen.
Well, I can't wait for your
Wonderful.
continuous improvement feedback too. You're an expert here, so I'd
Oh,
like to stay in touch on this. Thank you.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.